Corrupt cop slapped Bumpy Johnson's mother. 72 hours later, he was found naked and insane. The slap echoed in the hallway, sharp and public. A badge thought it had power. Harlem waited for blood, for chaos, for noise. Bumpy Johnson answered with silence, and something far colder. It wasn't loud at first. That was the part people remembered. A narrow hallway, old paint, footsteps passing like they always did. Then a hand moved where it had no right to move. The slap landed clean, sharp, deliberate. Not rage, not chaos. A message. Bumpy Johnson's mother staggered half a step, more surprised than hurt. The sound hung in the air longer than the pain. A badge stood in front of her, chest out, eyes cold, waiting to see who would speak first. No one did. Harlem had learned silence early. Silence was how you survived moments like this. Store owners pretended to straighten shelves. A man at the end of the hall looked down at his shoes like they suddenly mattered. Even the walls seemed to lean back. The cop smirked. He wanted fear. He wanted noise. He wanted a name to chase. Instead, he got something worse. Witnesses. Not the kind that shout. The kind that remember. Bumpy's mother didn't cry. She didn't curse. She adjusted her coat slowly, the way a woman does when dignity is the last thing she's holding. Her eyes lifted, not to the badge, but past him, down the hall, toward the street, as if she already knew. Someone always ran. A kid on a bicycle cut through the block too fast. A door closed that didn't need to. A whisperer moved from stoop to stoop, shop to shop, bar to bar. They slapped his mother. Not exaggerated. Not decorated. Just stated. That was enough. Across Harlem, men stopped mid-sentence. Dice froze in open palms. Coffee went untouched. The story didn't grow. It sharpened. Because everyone understood what it meant. This wasn't about a slap. It was about permission. If a badge could do this and walk away, then the street no longer had rules. And Harlem, for all its noise, lived by rules. Somebody asked where Bumpy was. Nobody answered. That scared them more. Because Bumpy Johnson wasn't a man who rushed into rooms. He didn't shout into crowds. When he was angry, the city didn't hear it right away. It felt it later. The cop didn't notice any of this. He laughed as he left, boots loud on the stairs, confidence borrowed from a uniform that had lied to him his whole life. He thought the moment was over. But moments like that don't end when the sound fades. They end when the wait arrives. And somewhere in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson was being told what happened. Not with panic, not with fury, just facts. And when the facts settled, so did something else. A decision. The streets whispered first. It started with a shopkeeper wiping a counter slower than usual. A barber paused mid-cut, scissors hovering. Windows reflected figures moving just a bit more cautiously than yesterday. Bumpy Johnson had a reputation for listening before acting. That was the real power. He didn't chase headlines. He absorbed them. Every insult, every misstep, every slight reached him through a network invisible to the untrained eye. A nod here, a door slammed there, a whispered name on a stoop. By late afternoon, the news had traveled the width of the neighborhood. They slapped his mother. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't exaggerated. It simply traveled with weight, like smoke curling through alleys. People looked up as Bumpy emerged. Wool coat over his shoulders, narrow tie straight, fedora low. His eyes didn't scan for trouble. They scanned understanding. Calm, measured, unreadable. The city seemed to hold its breath. Even the most skeptical, the men who prided themselves on ignoring authority, felt it. Something was coming. Not because Bumpy shouted, not because he raised a hand, because he could. Children playing in the streets stopped mid-step, sensing tension in a place where tension was rarely visible. Street vendors lowered their voices. The rhythm of Harlem slowed, as if the air itself recognized his presence. The cop who had struck his mother was still somewhere in the city, unaware of the unseen gaze following his every move. He had no idea that silence could weigh heavier than any gun, heavier than any badge. The crowd didn't gather yet. They didn't need to. Eyes met across street corners, alleyways, and stoops. Everyone knew what the signal was. Bumpy had heard, and he would respond, but not like the world expected. Respect was stronger than fear. Restraint was stronger than violence. And in Harlem, both were remembered long after the night ended. Bumpy didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply walked, measured steps across cracked pavement, past newspapers fluttering in the breeze, past the small hum of conversations that had died the moment the story reached them. The city felt it. Every person who had ever seen him understood. Power had arrived quietly, like a shadow stretching over familiar streets. Somewhere, a hand clenched a railing. Somewhere else, a man straightened his hat, pretending to tie a shoelace. Every small motion mattered, because Bumpy Johnson was coming. Not for spectacle, not for revenge, for control. And by the time Harlem saw him stop, everyone already knew who held the next move. Bumpy didn't rush. He moved through Harlem like a clock, ticking with purpose, slow, inevitable, and precise. Each step measured, each breath contained. The neighborhood watched from windows, doorways, and street corners, sensing the quiet before the storm. The corrupt cop had returned to his precinct, believing he had vanished in his safety. He didn't see the shadows shifting, didn't notice the glances exchanged at street corners, didn't hear the whispers that carried through alleys like a low drumbeat. He knows. Bumpy's approach wasn't loud. There were no threats shouted, no fists raised in warning. Just presence. Weight. Authority that demanded attention without uttering a word. The street and the man in front of him conspired silently. Bumpy didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He didn't move faster than necessary. He simply existed in the moment, a living embodiment of calm threat. The lesson was clear. Power didn't need to be noisy. Power didn't need to be immediate. Power needed only to be recognized. And in that recognition, the cop understood something he had never considered. His control, his badge, his arrogance. It meant nothing here. Nothing at all. Harlem exhaled collectively, though no one moved. The confrontation wasn't over. Not yet. But the imbalance was undeniable. The city knew who would decide how it ended. The street remained still. Silence hung like a thick fog, dense enough to choke the air from lungs. Every eye fixed on the cop, every ear straining for a sound that would signal relief or disaster. Bumpy didn't raise a hand. He didn't shout. He didn't even step closer than necessary. Yet the man in front of him felt every inch of dominance radiating from his posture. The cop's bravado, once loud and brash, was now brittle, cracking in the weight of observation. From the corner of the block, the butcher leaned over the counter. The barber froze mid-sweep of a client's hair. Children clutched their parents' hands, and neighbors peeked from windows above. Harlem itself was a witness. The city understood the lesson before it was spoken. Arrogance had a cost. Bumpy tilted his head slightly, the subtle movement carrying a message sharper than a blade. The cop's eyes flickered, hesitation, shame, fear, and then wider recognition. He was exposed. Every lie he had carried, every shortcut and abuse of power, laid bare beneath the unflinching gaze of a man who never needed to fight to win. The crowd's attention pressed closer, but Bumpy did not allow interference. He let the man crumble under observation, letting the weight of public scrutiny do what violence could not. Every bead of sweat on the cop's brow, every quiver of his jaw standing there. Bumpy stepped forward, slow, deliberate, each movement measured. His eyes scanned the space, not angrily, not impatiently, simply assessing, claiming, confirming. The cop, once brash and loud, flinched at the weight of that gaze. The crowd felt it too. The air itself had shifted, thickened, as if the city recognized who truly commanded its streets. No one moved. Children froze mid-step. Shopkeepers leaned against counters. The corner boys lowered their cigarettes without a word. All eyes were on him. Even the wind seemed to pause, folding itself around the quiet authority he exuded. Bumpy didn't speak. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His silence was sharper than any weapon, heavier than any hand that could strike. The cop's face twitched with uncertainty, the cracks of fear spreading across his features. Every bead of sweat, every darting eye, every tremor of his hands told the story that words could not. Dominance had arrived, patient and unshakable. Harlem had seen many men wield power, but few commanded it like this. Bumpy's restraint was more dangerous than fists, more persuasive than guns. In his calm, the crowd recognized a truth. Strength measured in violence is fleeting. Authority measured in patience is enduring. Neighbors whispered to each other, eyes wide, voices hushed. Every observer understood the same lesson. The streets belong not to the loudest, nor the cruelest, but to the one who can bend time, silence, and perception with nothing more than presence. The cop tried to step back, then stopped. His mind raced, but every move felt heavier under the invisible weight Bumpy carried. He was trapped, not by hands, but by awareness, by observation, by control that needed no demonstration beyond a steady gaze. Bumpy's jaw was firm, shoulders squared, every inch of him radiating a promise. Act recklessly, and the consequence always announced itself with chaos. It often traveled quietly, embedded in restraint, in the patience of one who knows the value of waiting for the exact right moment. The cop, the man who had thought he could humiliate, terrorize, and assert dominance, was now a cautionary shadow. People would speak of him in hushed tones, a reminder of what happens when arrogance meets a patient, unyielding force. He would remember it for the rest of his life, as would everyone else who had stood frozen on that street. Bumpy's own steps were steady. His mind was calm. The legacy he had crafted in those few minutes was not written in fear alone. It was etched in respect, in awareness, in the undeniable understanding that the man who commanded silence could command the world if he chose. Even the mundane parts of Harlem, the corner store, the fire hydrant, the faded signs on brick walls, seemed to hold the story. Every alley, every stoop, every passing stranger carried the memory of restraint that had spoken louder than violence. This was a city taught to respect authority not by threats, but by controlled presence, by patience, by the quiet assertion that some men define outcomes simply by existing within the space they occupy. By the time the sun dipped low, the crowd had dispersed, conversations trailing off into reflective silence. Families returned home, neighbors exchanged knowing glances, and the streets slowly emptied, leaving behind a city forever changed. Bumpy's legacy was not in the confrontation itself, but in the way it had rippled outward, a quiet dominance that would echo in Harlem long after the echoes of that moment faded. Power, Harlem learned that day, does not always need show of force. Sometimes it is carried on the calm, measured steps of a man who understands the weight of waiting, the strength in silence, and the respect earned by restraint. Bumpy Johnson had walked the streets, and in doing so, had written a lesson no one would forget.